Lock and Chase is a 1990 Game Boy game by Data East. A game under the same title originally made its debut when it hit arcades in 1981. It was later followed by ports on systems such as the Atari 2600.
Lock and Chase is a video game of cops and robbers. Although the cops outnumber the lone robber 4-1, he has a few tricks up his sleeve.
Coming out a generation later on Game Boy though, this is more of sort of a reboot, reimagining, sort of spiritual successor of the game, if you will. Which is a good thing, as I played both the original and this one, and yeah, this one's got a lot more going for it. Its premise is basically a cops and robbers game, the catch being you're the robber and you're robbing banks, which is dope because I love planning robberies and kidnappings, and if you do too, and you like Game Boy, then you might want to check this one out. On the surface, yeah, it's a Pac-Man clone, but that's because after Pac-Man came out in 1980, it started something called Pac-Man Fever, which was hard to imagine how big it was unless you were there. It was sort of crazy.
What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that?
So every company at that time made what you could call a response to that game, including Lock and Chase to a point, but there were far more blatant rip-offs of Pac-Man than even this one. And at the end of the day, these are simply maze games, so while originating as a Pac-Man clone, that's not really giving this Game Boy game especially enough credit, as it takes the Pac-Man formula and even the original game and builds upon it with light puzzle elements and a lot more mechanics than Pac-Man and some more varied level design, while also being slower paced overall as well. Your goal is to collect all the dots, or money I assume, while avoiding the cops, which have a few variations including faster ones and fatter ones, just like in real life. It starts off familiar and Pac-Man-ish enough for lack of a better term, but you always have this mechanic of being able to set up a false wall of sorts to get enemies off your ass, or if you like you can lock them in for even some bonus points, but I didn't rely on this much as honestly it's a bit of a weird mechanic at first, and if you make a mistake sometimes you can trap yourself in, but it's not totally necessary to master this, at least not in the beginning, and eventually I got good enough with it to get by. However, the game starts adding more gameplay elements such as doors to warp you to other doors in other sections of the level. There's also these sleepy cops who won't wake up unless you cross paths with an alarm clock. Question blocks that reverse these like small harmless enemies to the other enemies that are chasing you and vice versa, and I don't know, doors that open and can leave cops behind and things like that. There's money bag items that can make the cops cry and stop chasing you briefly, and there's these diamonds that incapacitate the cops while also making you faster for a limited amount of time, which is nice, as again this is a much slower game than Pac-Man. But with the diamond you can also knock cops out here too for like points, and these diamonds also net you chances between levels at a mini game for like extra lives and such. As well as being a game of progression, its arcade roots does have a high score sort of mentality, which you can keep until you game over. The game is pretty friendly as it does have infinite continues, and most probably won't mind the score reset, but later in the game it's nice to have more than the default lives perhaps, so getting a good run, sort of like all or nothing, isn't a bad way to approach the game either. A few things worth noting: in some stages, especially ones with the sleepy cops, they do introduce secret false like walls that you can pass through, so you might want to go looking for these. If you're not aware of this, it can be pretty frustrating. Once you know about it though, it's not too bad, and they create sort of a safe area so the cops won't pass through them.
Punk ass, bitch ass, crooked ass cop.
Okay.
You a rookie.
Another thing to be aware of, and this is a great feature that can be overlooked, but when you pause the game, you can scroll around the screen seeing what coins you've missed, where enemies are, etc. So use this to your advantage and check it on the regular, as it will definitely help you, especially on bigger stages. This all ends with a climax area where you want to get this big ass diamond and you have to walk a key around a path to unlock it. It's actually a pretty challenging stage and a nice change of pace. After doing this, the game does loop, presenting a harder difficulty and with some things changed around. Having 6 stages broken up into 3 stages each is not too long of a game or too short. I'd say it's just about right for this sort of game, and if you get into it, again, there's the more challenging extra stages if you want to play the second loop. The graphics are good enough, having a chibi cutesy sort of look. The music is passable with nothing too memorable, but it's catchy enough, even changing tones when cops are asleep to when they wake up, and there's some sort of cutesy cutscenes between chapters. When all is said and done, it's a good Game Boy game if you like Pac-Man sort of style light puzzler maze games. I'd recommend it for sure, but it's definitely not going to be for everyone, and it's not the most exciting game ever, but I wouldn't consider it a bad game by any means, and I had a decent time playing through it, and it was a fair challenge, and once I got a bit more comfortable with the little barriers you can put up, I found it to be a good pick up and play game to spend a little time with. Thanks for watching.